General Alfred Jodl once said about George Patton, "He was the American Guderian. He was very bold and preferred large movements. He took big risks and won big successes." However, opinions of Allied leadership among German generals varied widely, from grudging respect to outright dismissal, shaped by battlefield experiences and ideological biases. These differing perceptions provide a glimpse into the minds of those who fought against the Allies. By examining their views, we gain insights into the strategic thinking that influenced World War II. Let's delve into how German generals regarded their Allied counterparts and how these opinions shifted as the war progressed. Of all the Allied generals, there was one who stood out in the eyes of the German High Command, a commander so aggressive, so relentless in his pursuit of victory, that he earned a grudging respect from his enemies. General Patton, the flamboyant American general, was seen by many German officers as a kindred spirit. In fact, some went so far as to consider him the most German of the Allied commanders. But what exactly did they mean by that? Patton's approach to warfare aligned closely with the German military philosophy. He believed in constant movement, rapid advances, and overwhelming force. This style of combat was eerily familiar to the German generals, reminiscent of their own blitzkrieg tactics. Patton's aversion to statistic warfare was legendary. He once famously urinated into a slit trench meant for protection, declaring, "There, now try to use it." This disdain for fixed positions resonated with the German commanders who valued mobility above all else. Heinz Guderian, the mastermind behind Germany's blitzkrieg strategy, couldn't help but admire Patton's tactical prowess. He said, "I hear much about General Patton, and he conducted a good campaign. From the standpoint of a tank specialist, I must congratulate him on his victory, since he acted as I would have done had I been in his place." But it wasn't just Guderian who held Patton in high regard. General Gunther Blumentritt, who was a key planner in the invasions of France and Poland, described Patton as the most aggressive panzer general of the Allies. He noted, "His operations impressed us enormously, probably because he came closest to our own concept of the classical military commander." However, the German view of Patton wasn't universally positive. Some commanders saw him more as a tactical genius than a strategic mastermind. They focused their attention on figures like Montgomery and Eisenhower when it came to grand strategy. Patton's command style also drew parallels with the German concept of Auftragstaktik, or mission-type orders. This approach emphasized giving broad directives and allowing subordinate commanders to use their initiative on the battlefield. Patton himself once said, "Never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity." Yet for all the admiration, there was also criticism. Some German officers felt Patton's rapid advance in Sicily was more about personal glory than strategic necessity. Military historian Harry Yida even described Patton's rush to Messina as a display of empty glory. It's important to note that the Germans had a tradition of strict evaluation. They weren't easily impressed by a single campaign, no matter how successful. Because of their own pool of experienced armored commanders, Patton's reputation, while notable, wasn't as dominant in their eyes as you might expect. In fact, some German military historians pointed out that Patton's logistical accomplishments, while impressive, were often overshadowed by the sheer scale of resources available to the Allies. This led to a perception that Allied victories were due more to material superiority than individual skill. So while Patton was respected for his aggressive tactics and mobility-focused strategy, the German view of him was complex and nuanced. They saw him in a reflection of their own military philosophy, but also a beneficiary of America's vast industrial might. This paradox, a German-style general in American uniform, made Patton a fascinating figure to his enemies, one they both admired and sought to understand. While Patton's aggressive tactics earned him respect among German commanders, their view of British leadership was quite different. You might think the Germans saw their British adversaries as pushovers, but the reality was far more complex. In fact, German generals held a surprising level of respect for British forces, particularly when it came to their resilience and professionalism. General Siegfried Westphal, a high-ranking German officer, once remarked, "The hardest, toughest in attack, and most persistent in defense were the British divisions." This wasn't just empty praise. German military assessments consistently highlighted the uniformity of British personnel and their remarkable absence of failures in key battles. It's clear that the Germans saw something special in the British fighting spirit. Despite this admiration for British troops, German commanders often viewed British leadership as overly cautious. In the fast-paced world of mechanized warfare, hesitation could be deadly. General Erwin Rommel, the famous Desert Fox, expressed this frustration when he said to captured British officers after the siege of Tobruk, "Gentlemen, you have fought like lions and been led by donkeys." Of course, no discussion of German views on the British would be complete without mentioning Hitler's perspective. Hitler's view towards Britain was much more complicated. In Hitler's mind, the British were potential natural allies for Germany. He saw them as fellow Aryans, a group he believed should be working with Germany rather than against it. But what was the purpose of their conflict? Hitler believed that Jews were manipulating the British, turning them against Germany. This bizarre worldview allowed Hitler to justify his war against Britain while maintaining a twisted form of respect for them, and because of that it affected the German strategy. The respect for British resilience meant that German commanders often prepared for tough, prolonged engagements when facing British forces. They knew that even if they gained an initial advantage, the British were likely to dig in and fight hard. At the same time, the perception of cautious British leadership led to some interesting tactical choices. German commanders sometimes took risks, betting that their British counterparts would react slowly. This aggressive approach occasionally paid off, but it could also backfire tremendously when British forces proved more skillful than expected. One area where German respect for British capabilities was particularly evident was in the air war. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, grudgingly acknowledged British technological expertise, saying, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. The British knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft, and they give it a speed which they have now increased yet again." This admiration for British engineering and innovation influenced German aircraft development throughout the war. In the end, the German perspective on British forces was a mix of respect, frustration, and grudging admiration. They saw their opponents as tough and professional, but sometimes held back by overly cautious leadership. This complex view shaped German strategy and tactics throughout the conflict, often in ways that had profound effects on the course of the war. While German opinions of British and American forces were complex, their view of the Soviet military underwent a dramatic transformation. The German perception of Soviet forces varied significantly over the course of the war. Initially, many Germans underestimated the capabilities of the Soviets, viewing them as a less competent adversary. At the start of Operation Barbarossa, many German commanders viewed the Soviet Union as an easy target. They saw the Red Army as poorly equipped, badly led, and incapable of standing up to the Wehrmacht's superior tactics and technology. Nazi racial theories painted Slavic peoples as Untermenschen or subhumans. This view led many German officers to believe that Soviet soldiers would simply crumble in the face of German strength. However, as the conflict unfolded and the Soviet military demonstrated resilience and strategic ingenuity, this view shifted dramatically. The German perspective on Soviet forces evolved from outright dismissal to genuine fear as the war progressed. German forces encountered unexpectedly fierce resistance. The Red Army may have been caught off guard initially, but they quickly proved their resilience and determination. This defense forced German commanders to reassess their views. Field Marshal Paul Ludwig Ewald von Kleist, reflecting on this shift in perception, stated, "From the very beginning, the Russians proved themselves first-class warriors. Our success in the first months of the war can be explained by better training. Having gained combat experience, the Russians became first-class soldiers, and they fought with exceptional perseverance and had astounding endurance." This grudging respect for Soviet fighting spirit grew as the war dragged on. The Battle of Stalingrad marked a turning point, not just in the course of the war, but in German perceptions of their enemy. The Red Army's ability to encircle and destroy an entire German army shattered any remaining illusions of Soviet inferiority. As Soviet counteroffensives gained momentum, German commanders found themselves facing an opponent that was not only numerous, but also increasingly skilled and well-equipped. The fear that began to grip German forces was palpable. They realized they were no longer facing an inferior enemy, but a juggernaut that was growing stronger with each passing day. Franz Halder, a German general and the Chief of Staff of the Army High Command, said about the Soviet army, "It seems the enemy, on the initiative of the new command, and also perhaps under the influence of England, makes every effort to hold the front line and not allow us to move further east. Russian troops are fighting, as before, with the greatest tenacity and severity." This evolution in German thinking had profound strategic implications. The confidence that had characterized the early stages of Operation Barbarossa gave way to a more cautious approach. German commanders now had to contend with an enemy they genuinely feared, one capable of matching and even surpassing their own military strength. It's worth noting that this shift in perception wasn't universal or immediate. Some German officers clung to their ideological biases longer than others. However, by the time Soviet forces were driving towards Berlin, even the most ardent believers in Nazi racial theories had to confront the reality of Soviet military power. Contrary to what might be assumed, the German viewpoints on Allied forces have not faded post-war. Instead, they continue to influence present-day military strategy. The insights collected from German generals regarding their adversaries provide critical lessons that are relevant today. For instance, the admiration for British resilience has led many modern armies to prioritize troop morale and endurance. Similarly, the worries about Soviet numerical strength has driven NATO to invest heavily in technological advancements. Additionally, the effectiveness of Patton's bold tactics has left a lasting mark on mechanized warfare doctrine. Thank you for watching the video. We hope you found this video informative. If you enjoyed learning about today's topic, make sure to check out our video about the 5 most underrated German generals of World War II. It's a fascinating look into the lives and military careers of some of World War II's most skilled yet overlooked commanders. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more World War II content. And we'll see you in the next one.